In the United States, there's a pretty cool music festival that's become super corporate. It's called Burning Man. It's in the middle of the desert. Tickets sell for thousands of dollars depending on the kind of fancy tent you want. But that's nothing compared to the UK version of that festival called Glastonbury. £400, that's almost $700 for a regular ticket. This is not a poor people's concert. It's for the fancy people. And one of the observations people always make is that the politics of Glastonbury are very much left-wing, progressive, exhibitionist, virtue signaling, luxury beliefs that come with a luxury concert. For example, the security around Glastonbury is enormous. Very tall fences, high security gates. While inside they talk about having no borders style open immigration. It's quite something. It's always been left-wing, but yesterday hit a new low. Take a look at this singer from the band called Bob Vylan. I wonder if he knows that his riff on Bob Dylan, that Bob Dylan was a Jew named Robert Zimmerman. I don't think he knows, and he might change the name if he knew, because let me just sum it up. That guy doesn't really like Jews. And he doesn't really like England either. I'm going to play two clips from him. Here he is chanting for the globalization of the Intifada and the ethnic cleansing of Israel. Here, take a listen.
Free, 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 free. All right, but have you heard this one, though? Death, death to the IDF. 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 To the IDF! Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be, inshallah, it will be.
Yeah, you don't normally hear someone calling for chants of death outside of Gaza, but there it is amongst the fanciest in the UK, and they just cheered. But it's not just the Jews he has in his targets. Although he himself was actually born in the UK, he despises the place. Here, give him a listen.
Heard you want your country back. Ha! Shut the fuck up. Heard you want your country back. You can't have that. Heard you want your country back. Ha! Shut the fuck up. Heard you want your country back. Shit, me too. Heard you want your country back. Shut the fuck up. Heard you want your country back. You can't have that. The only place I know. Stolen right under my nose by ignorant scum. Trying to lay claim to a land that ain't theirs anyway. Wait, what did you say? Heard you want your country back. Ha! Shut the fuck up. Heard you want your country back. You can't have that. Heard you want your country back. Ha! Shut the fuck up. Heard you want your country back. Well shit, me too. Want your country back. But you cannot have that.
The reason I mention that is because that was streamed live on the BBC state broadcaster. It was an approved musical act by Glastonbury, and it was of a piece with other pro-terrorist acts. And I would say pro-terrorism, I'm not using that as an insult, that is an observation. There's an Irish band called Kneecap, named after the tactic of shooting people in the knees. Their lead singer is almost 40, so he wears a face-covering balaclava to appear younger and more menacing. Kneecap, they go much further. They don't dispense with using the word Zionist. They just come right out and say it. They're for the terrorist groups Hamas and Hezbollah. They're not afraid to show it. Here's a clip of them. They were playing over the weekend in Glastonbury, and here they are in the United Kingdom actually breaking out a terrorist flag, which is quite something. I mean, if I said to you, can you acquire a terrorist flag, you would probably say, I'm not sure how to do that. These guys figured it out, and they were only too happy to fly it. Take a look. Well, lots of humming and hawing the day afterwards, but the Met Police, which is a large police force in the United Kingdom, has announced that they will not be filing charges against kneecap despite their overt support for terrorist groups. And Bob Vylan is at his most popular ever. I think his talent agency has dropped him, and I understand that the U.S. State Department has now canceled his visa. He was planning a U.S. tour, and he's planning to come to Canada too. I say all this because that is the state of political discourse on the BBC, in pop culture, in the music biz, and all of it is madly applauded and at most some tut-tutting by police. Compare that to a mother named Lucy Connolly, who momentarily had a tweet using intemperate words in reaction to the stabbing of young girls by a Muslim convert in Southport some months ago. Lucy Connolly, for a tweet that she quickly deleted, was sentenced to 31 months in prison. 31 months in prison, a decision that was upheld by an appeal court. Welcome to two-tier United Kingdom. What a place to be. And joining us now is one of my favorite guys who I think is the personification of the British spirit. You gotta love him. His name is David Atherton. He's a freelance journalist, and he joins us now. David, great to see you.
And you, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Have you ever been to Glastonbury, or is it just not your style?
Oh, I can't afford 400 quid. That's just the cheap seats.
Yeah, 400 to get in, the cheap seats. It really is the fanciest people. I saw some crowd shots, and I've got nothing against white people. I'm white myself. But this really was the whitest, richest, I guess you would say middle class, even some posh people. This was, I think, people cosplaying as progressives. I think they were enjoying the frisson of, badness of cheering for Hezbollah from their, these are people who work behind desks, often for the government, often for NGOs. And this was, they get to play act as being bad boys for the weekend, but they fully embraced anti-Semitism and I think anti-Britishism. That's my take. What do you think?
Oh, I agree with you on that. It's a liberal left of prayer, so to speak, isn't it? It's as far as I'm concerned, these are the people that have, apart from the Marxists who have marched along through the institutions, have all these woke ideologies and love to have trans kids, and they're right on, and they're all pro-Palestinian, they're all anti-Semitic, they're all anti-Israel. They're the most appalling people in the world, and they're the people I despise the most. And also, one of the things that Bob Vylan did was, he said one of these was, one of the phrases that people on the centre right use: "We want to take our country back," and he absolutely was contemptuous of that phrase, the fact that British people want to be ruled by, if you like, with the British culture. That to my mind was equally as offensive on the way he went about things. Though the death to IDF was bad enough, but he really did make a complete horlicks of himself, a complete idiot of himself, and he's paying the price for it. Also, by the way, his record company's dropped him as well. It's not only his management; his record company has dropped him as well. And when the Glastonbury Festival and the BBC both apologised for his performance, they've done quite a bit wrong. So,
well, I take your point that certain musical establishments are now distancing themselves, but I think he's probably more popular now than ever. He's got more publicity now than ever. And in the age of the internet, I think he's going to do very well. I mean, kneecap, the harder and the crazier they go, the more pro-terrorist they go, the more free headlines they get. I mean, they're not particularly good musically, but look across the pond in New York City, you've got Zoran Mamdani, a communist Palestinian, pro-Palestinian extremist, is leading the polls to be the mayor. So I think that the old establishment is distancing himself, but these are the princes of the new establishment. And the worse they are, the more they're, it's like that. I don't know if you followed it in the UK, this murderer, Luigi, this accused murderer, who walked up to a healthcare CEO and just shot him, assassinated him in broad daylight, has been turned into a kind of sex symbol hero by the left. And I think there's a madness afoot. Is that going on in the UK to the same extent?
Well, it is to a great extent. The most horrible thing about Bob Vylan's performance was anti-Semitism has now gone mainstream. everyone feels comfortable being anti-Semitic. You might, I don't know whether I mentioned it, but I'm actually of Jewish heritage myself on my mother's side, going back to 1656 in Britain. Well, in England, then it would have been in England in that time. I don't get that much anti-Semitic abuse, but I get enough to be getting on with it, kind of thing. So no, this is really is. Britain has really dug itself a hole when it comes to who can have an opinion, who can't have an opinion, who gets cancelled for having an opinion, and who doesn't get cancelled for an opinion.
You know,
by the way, I should sorry, very briefly, I should also point out that. Even Ofcom have actually will be investigating the BBC because it went out live in the afternoon with supposedly with a family orgies. I think he swore as well. So they could really, he really could be, and them and the BBC really could be in trouble.
You know, one of the tough things here is censorship, because I think you and me both believe in freedom of speech. And I'm not sure if I would want the government to ban anti-Semitic comments. I think supporting a terrorist group, buying a terrorist flag, saying, you know, up with Hamas, up with Hezbollah, that might go beyond free speech to actual material support for a terrorist group. And I have no problem with the U.S. keeping out foreign troublemakers, but I do still have free speech instincts, even for those who were vile, like this Bob Villan. But
well, actually, Ezra, I do actually agree with you, actually, because you know, the IDF is an entity. If I said, you know, death to the Taliban, I don't think anyone would be bothered about it.
Right.
No, but you know, but saying death to the IDF, no. If you said, you know, death to Captain Owen, who's you know, who works in the parachute regiment of the IDF, that obviously should be illegal. But because it's a body, because it's an entity, maybe that should not be a prosecutable offence.
Well, here's my point, and it's the reason I mentioned Lucy Connolly, is the United Kingdom is becoming more and more censorship oriented. The Times of London says literally every day there are 30 police actions involving a non-crime hate incident. 30 a day. Such an astonishing large number. Some cases like Lucy Connolly's are the most extreme. And at the same time, they, you know, brush aside, ignore, or tolerate extreme you know, bigotry, hate, pro-terrorism commentary. I think there's a two-tier system here at play. I mean, you mentioned Ofcom. Here in Canada, we would refer to that as the CRTC. It's the broadcast regulator that reviews shows. They beat up GB News. They beat up Mark Stein on GB News for interviewing a COVID skeptic. Like they jump on Nigel Farage for not being balanced. So they're exquisitely curious if there's a conservative who says something that's just edgy, although none of the people I mentioned have said anything like F the Jews or whatever. But they're just absolutely timid to take on a crowd of tens of thousands of cheering Hamas supporters. I think they're afraid. I think they're politically afraid. That's my beef with the UK. It's a two-tier justice system. Imagine if Tommy Robinson had said those things that Bob Villan had said.
We did. He'd bang up for 10 years for that.
Yeah.
And by the way, I seem to be the only person who's come up with this unique theory of what's going on in the world, or with Israel and what have you. Is I think at the moment the West is going through a spot of Stockholm syndrome, whereby because there's large amounts of often aggressive and sometimes violent Muslims in Europe, it seems to be the best way to appease them is to be anti-Israel and pro-Hamas. That's my theory for what it's worth. No one else has mentioned it, but you know, that's my theory. You know, people in the West are supporting Hamas out of self-protection, you know, as a means of self-protection, I have to say. And when you sort of move on to two-tier policing and two-tier justice, you know, Sir Keir Starmer opened up the courts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until he banged up as many people as he could. No, there were people there. Peter Lynch, he was just standing around verbally abusing the police, and he was given 2 years in jail. And in jail because he was under threat from Muslim inmates, he committed suicide by hanging. No, that's absolutely disgusting. It's not only him. There's Wayne O'Rourke. He's serving 3 years. He's serving 3 years at the moment. And the worst thing he said was about he commented on burning cars, and he said, "Let's have some more. Let's have some more of that. Or go on, lads." He was encouraging people. He shouldn't have said that. He's wrong to say that. He should be punished for it. But it should not be 3 years. And I think what Starmer felt at the time of when Axel Kabbalah murdered those 3 little girls was he knew how angry we were, and we still remain angry. And the fact that Tommy Robinson was banged up for such a long time and treated so horribly, which borders on torture, it's all welling up. And the fact the Labour Party were against a national grooming inquiry, when they're going to have blood all over their hands on something like that. The Labour Council deliberately went out and covered it up. Some councils were actually involved in the abuse of the girls themselves. And certainly there was a lot of the councillors that actually were actively involved in suppressing it, along with the police and social workers who didn't want to be thought as being racist and lose their jobs should they have to do it properly and an even measure as opposed to a 2-tier measure. For example, that there were two left-wing oriented, I'm saying left-wing oriented, but two so-called far-right people. Ricky Jones, he was seen in one of the post Southport riots, drawing his finger across his throat.
Yeah, he was a Labour councillor, wasn't he?
Yeah, Labour councillor. Yeah, he's not in court until the 30th of August.
Yeah,
if he'd been a so-called far-right protester, he would have been banged up and given 4 years in jail. Yeah. There were 2 Muslim guys who were coming back from Manchester Airport, and they got in a fight with the police.
Yeah.
And they broke the nose of a policewoman, and they also assaulted another officer. It was a secure area of the airport as well, high security area of the airport, and they started a fight. And they're actually in court today. And as far as we're concerned, 31 months, which is what Lucy Connolly got, is the bar for these people. But I'm telling you what, we're going to see two-tier justice here. They're probably going to get suspended sentences, or maybe 3 to 6 months at the very best. Now, the world is watching them, and we know full well that justice will not be served.